David Pastrňák 1,000% belongs in the top 10 on the Locked On NHL's top 100 list, and the fact that he isn't is just straight up preposterous.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Thank you so much for making Locked On Boston Bruins your first listen every day. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on today's podcast, we're going to start with David Pastrňák's shocking snub from the top 10 of the Locked On NHL's top 100 list. We'll also look at where Charlie McAvoy and Jeremy Swayman were slotted. Finally, we'll break down the Bruins' preseason win over the Washington Capitals last night, highlighted by Brett Harrison's 2-goal night, Joonas Korpisalo's strong performance, and some fresh roster cuts from Don Sweeney. Again, thank you for making Locked On Bruins your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Before we get into today's topics, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. And you can find me, my hockey thoughts and dad jokes, at Ian C. McLaren. I am a lifelong Boston Bruins fan, and I've been covering this team and the NHL for various outlets for 20 years almost now. Okay, so recently, Locked On NHL hosts did a vote on the top 100 players. And a few weeks ago, when we were doing it, I talked about how if David Pastrňák was not among the top 10 players, it would be just outrageous. Lo and behold, yesterday the list was revealed, and here's the top 10. Connor McDavid, Nathan MacKinnon, Leon Draisaitl, Cale Makar, Nikita Kucherov. I mean, it's hard to argue against any of those guys. Then you have Austin Matthews, Connor Hellebuyck, Kirill Kaprizov, Alexander Barkov, and Quinn Hughes, with David Pastrňák coming in at number 11. Coincidentally, he also ranked 11th on a top 100 list that was released by Sportsnet this week. Their own write-up and logic dictates there's a strong case for David Pastrňák to be higher on this list. Over the past 3 seasons, no player has scored more goals than David Pastrňák at 151. At even strength, again, number 1, 112 goals over the past 3 seasons. In points, he's behind only McDavid, MacKinnon, Kucherov, and Draisaitl. And that includes 3 straight 100-point seasons, 3 straight 40-goal seasons, and a peak 61-goal year in 2022-23. And yet he's not in the top 10. Even this past season, he had 106 points, 43 goals, 63 assists, with a very, let's just say it, weak supporting cast. You look at McDavid and Draisaitl both on this list. Very rightly so. They're 2 of the best players in the world, but they have the luxury of playing often together. Nathan MacKinnon, Cale Makar, same thing. Nikita Kucherov, he's surrounded by a boatload of talent, including Braden Point, Victor Hedman, Jake Gensel. All of these guys have much stronger supporting casts than our boy David Pastrňák. And especially this past season, where he had 106 points. Morgan Geekie second on the team with 57. There was no bigger gap in the NHL between your top scorer and your second leading scorer. Brad Marchand was traded. And this is part of the argument against him not being in the top 10. People point to the state of the Boston Bruins. Boston missed the playoffs last season. Brad Marchand was traded. Charlie Coyle, Brandon Carlo traded. It's a team in transition. But let's be clear, that is a team problem, not a David Pastrňák problem. Well, it is, but you know what I mean. When it comes to his personal abilities, this is a guy in his prime at just 29, literally carrying the Bruins offense. Still among the elite of the elite, despite the fact that he has a very depleted supporting cast around him. He achieved those numbers last season playing with largely Pavel Zacha and Morgan Geekie. Elias Lindholm slotted in there towards the end of the season. Don't forget, Morgan Geekie was often a healthy scratch when Jim Montgomery was still behind the bench. Montgomery was fired. Joe Sacco had the bright idea of putting him on the top line, and he was one of the top goal scorers in the NHL from January 1st on. David Pastrňák was not only able to maintain elite numbers, but he was also able to help facilitate a career season for Geekie and a nice contract extension for the Bruins forward. He led the NHL last season in goals, assists, and points at 5-on-5. Look back and see how bad the Boston Bruins power play was last season. If they had any amount of even average success on the power play, he's probably got close to 50 goals, over 110 points, 115 maybe. Pastrňák isn't just a top 10 player. He's arguably a top 5 player. To rank him outside the top 10 is straight up indefensible. Look, I get you have to account for more than just total points. Connor Hellebuyck is the reigning Vezina and Hart Trophy winner, so obviously he's going to get a bump. Alexander Barkov has captained the Florida Panthers to 2 straight Stanley Cups, so he's going to get a bump. But as I talked about earlier this week in relation to Kirill Kaprizov, for example, his $17 million contract compared to David Pastrňák making $11.25 million. And Pastrňák has been more productive than Kaprizov over the last several seasons. And that's on a per game basis, accounting for Kaprizov being injured a little bit there. Pastrňák has been healthy. He's played a full 82 games in each of the past 3 seasons. We can't even say he was fully healthy because we know he's been dealing with this tendonitis issue. And the fact that the Bruins have fallen off a bit just proves even more that David Pastrňák is one of the best players in the NHL. He's trying to drag the Bruins back into contention. When the Bruins were well out of it last season, he did not, wave the white flag, call it a day. He played some of his best hockey last season down the stretch when the Bruins were out of it and they had traded a bunch of their core players. That's a testament to how good this guy is. No player has scored more goals than David Pastrňák over the last 3 seasons. Total and at even strength, where the majority of the game is played. In points, he's behind only McDavid, McKinnon, Kucherov, and Draisaitl, all of whom belong in the top 5. Cale Makar, you can put him in there. But when it comes to Quinn Hughes, you got to add some defensemen. I understand that. He should at least be over there in that list over Kaprizov and Barkov. And you can make an argument that he should be ahead of Austin Matthews as well. Yeah, he's had some health issues, but David Pastrňák, you can't fault him for being healthy over these other guys. The numbers stack up against anybody in the NHL outside of McDavid, Draisaitl, McKinnon, Kucherov, like the elite of the elite. He is right there with those guys and at least should be a top 10 player on this list. At the very least. You can bump Kaprizov, bump Barkov out of there. he should at least be 8th. And you can make an argument for as high as 5th or 6th, in my opinion. So just plain insanity that he's not on this list in the top 10. It's indefensible. He's not the only Bruin in the Locked On NHL Top 100, though. Coming up, where do Charlie McAvoy and Jeremy Swayman rank? Is it fair, or are they misranked? We'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Just pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. People love how FanDuel gives them so many ways to play. You can build parlays, try player props, even follow the live lines during games. It makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what exactly are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today to get started. Put down $5, and if that bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the FanDuel app. All right, we are talking today about the Locked On NHL Top 100 list, and as you can see here, David Pastrňák nowhere to be seen on the top 10, which, as I've argued time and time again, is just flat out ridiculous. He should be on this list because of his elite play. Only 4 players with more points. He leads the league in goals over the last 3 seasons. If that doesn't scream top 10, I don't know what does. You can see here on the list that he comes in 11th ahead of Sidney Crosby, Mikko Rantanen, and you could probably argue Sidney Crosby is a bit high up there as well. Now, where do other Bruins appear on this list? Well, at number 38, you have Charlie McAvoy, and I believe that puts him about 7th among NHL defensemen. And you know what? That's actually pretty fair and perhaps a bit higher than I thought he would come in on this list. You can see he's actually ahead of Adam Fox, who's 39th, and Fox is a Norris Trophy winner. I would have expected that these same issues that hindered David Pastrňák would have been counted against McAvoy, and even more so because he was injured for a good part of last season. The Bruins are on a downswing. McAvoy has not been able to put up, big time offensive numbers. He's not been a Norris Trophy finalist, but he's still one of the best defensemen in the NHL. He logs heavy minutes. He's always up against the toughest matchups defensively, and he's a consistent possession driver. Charlie McAvoy contains a rare blend of physicality and skill. He's kind of the type of player every contender wants anchoring its top pair. He's a guy who can drive the offense, but he's also just a beast to go up against in terms of the defensive zone. If the Norris Trophy was like more of a Selke Trophy conversation, kind of the best two-way defenseman at the very least, or maybe they need to go to that Bobby Orr Trophy for offensive defenseman, Norris Trophy for defensive defenseman. He's kind of a tweener in that way. He's not piling up points. He's not, perhaps the most effective power play quarterback and pulling his numbers up that way. And that hurts him in lists like this. but his two-way value should place him closer to perhaps the top 20 conversation when he's on his game. Maybe he's bumped down a bit because he was injured. Maybe he should be a bit higher. But at the same time, I thought he would have been rated a bit lower because of his down season, injury-wise, etc. Although, when you look at how he played versus Canada at the Four Nations face-off with that injured shoulder, you can see how valuable he is. States won that game, and he was trucking Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby, anybody who got in his way with that, even with that shoulder injury. Every year, he's kind of overlooked in Norris chatter. Still on this list, he's outside the top 5 defensemen, which is fair. You still have your Makars, Quinn Hughes, Victor Hedman, who else? Rasmus Dahlin belongs in that conversation, I believe. I think he could have a Norris-level year if Buffalo improves a bit. Either way, McAvoy is as indispensable to Boston as Pastrnak, and his injury kind of prompted Don Sweeney to make that trade deadline sell-off last season. When it comes to Jeremy Swayman, he comes in at number 86 on this list. And it's hard to argue that he should be much higher, right? This is telling given how last season went. If you had done this list heading into last season, after his unbelievable performance in the 2024 playoffs against the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Florida Panthers, leading the NHL in save percentage, heading into his first full season as a bona fide number 1, he's probably higher. But last season did not go well. His numbers cratered. The Bruins finished last in the East, and Swayman's stock is way down right now. Now he enters year 2 as the starter, facing major pressure to bounce back. At his best, he can be a Vezina contender. He can be one of the better goalies in the NHL. We've seen it. The question is, can he do it without Linus Ullmark as his partner? And can he help the Bruins get back to relevance this upcoming season? At his best, he's a Vezina contender. At his worst, he was a big part of the reason why the Bruins collapsed last season. Yes, there were injuries on the blue line. Yes, this team couldn't score, but he was also letting in some uncharacteristic goals, ones that he usually would have had. So that's why 85th kind of makes sense. He's still recognized as one of the top 100 players in the league, but he definitely has a lot to prove in 2025-26. Remember, Jeremy Swayman's re-ascension is one of the key storylines for Boston this season. If he rebounds, they can compete. If not, it could derail things, and he could be outside the top 100 this time next season. So that's where the Bruins rank on the Locked On NHL's top 100. You have David Pastrňák at 11th, Charlie McAvoy, 38th, Jeremy Swayman, 85th. McAvoy, you could argue, underappreciated in some respects. You could argue he could be higher on that list. He could be a top 5 defenseman. You could argue he could be perhaps too high on this list based on the criteria that was being held up against David Pastrňák. Swayman has to earn back trust. Along with Pastrňák, these are 3 pillars Boston's season definitely rests on, and they have to be at least where they are on this list at the moment. Like, Pastrňák has to be that top 5 scorer once again. Charlie McAvoy has to be a top 7 defenseman. Jeremy Swayman has to be much better than the 85th best player in the NHL in order for the Bruins to turn things around. Speaking of goaltending, Joonas Korpisalo did turn in a fantastic performance last night, while Brett Harrison, of all people, scored twice against the Capitals. some roster cuts, what's coming for the Bruins this weekend. We're going to break it all down next here as the podcast continues. The Bruins played their 5th of 6 preseason games last night in Washington, defeating the Capitals by a score of 3-1. And yesterday I talked about Marco Sturm discussing the need for younger guys to do something special in order to crack the roster. With all eyes on Matt Pastrňák, Fabian Lysell, Georgi Merkulov to an extent, it was Brett Harrison who delivered with 2 goals, one on just a fantastic effort, taken down to the ice, making things happen, banging the puck in, 1911 of the second period to make it 2-1. He had an empty netter to seal it with a 3-1 victory. Skated with Patrick Brown and Riley Duran, logged about 10 and a half minutes of ice time. He said coming into this game, he was feeling pretty good about his game. And Marco Sturm, head coach, after the game said, every drill, he gives you everything. And that's why they wanted to reward him with some playing time in his game. Harrison, you'll remember, was a 3rd-round pick, 85th overall, back in 2021. He is only 22 years old. He turned 22 back in April, June, something like that. This was the same draft class as Fabian Lysell. Last season with Providence, he skated in 46 games, 6 goals, 11 assists for 17 total points. So some somewhat underwhelming offensive numbers after being much better than a point per game player in his final season in the OHL 2 years ago. But it was an impressive performance for this guy amid some other players needing to step up, which you could argue they really didn't last night. Matt Pastrňák has been the better of the younger guys. If you're looking at Merkulov and Lysell, it really appears as though Fraser Minton will make this team. He was not in the lineup last night, reserved for more a veteran lineup that we'll see in the preseason finale this weekend against the New York Rangers. Harrison likely destined to begin in Providence, but that was a good showing last night. And he's a guy to keep an eye on here from the 2021 draft class. A lot of talk about Fabian Lysell likely not cracking the lineup in his 4th straight year. He's still pretty young as well. These guys are only 22. Sometimes it takes players longer to develop. Lysell was a later 1st-round pick, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him. There's no risk of waivers because Pastrňák, Lysell waiver exempt. But there's going to be some big decisions coming up here over the weekend with the Monday deadline to set your roster. So Saturday, Sunday, there could be some big names hitting the waiver wire, and you're going to want to be following along on the YouTube channel and on Instagram or TikTok to get the absolute latest on the Boston Bruins. So Bruin of the day, Brett Harrison, very, very good performance for the 22-year-old center. Excited to see some of his progression here with Providence this season. The other big story last night was Joonas Korpisalo's strong showing. He is the likely favorite to be the backup this season. Maybe they could ride more of a tandem in order to not overwork Swayman. Marco Sturm said there won't be one guy playing 8 games in a row. It's going to be both of them who have to carry this team. Riley Tufte said Korpisalo was awesome. Definitely kept the Bruins alive. 33 saves on 34 shots, only beaten by Ryan Leonard, James Hagen's line mate at BC last year. Speaking of Tufte, he did open the scoring for Boston with a gritty poke check goal, skated on a line with Johnny Beecher and Mark Kastelik. And he's a guy who could be a low-key promotion candidate as the season goes on as well. Riley Tufte was signed before last year. He did have 42 points in 58 games for Providence last season, 0 points in 6 games when called up to the Boston Bruins. Prior to that game, Don Sweeney assigned Dalton Bancroft, John Farinacci, Dan Schlockmelis, and Billy Sweezy to Providence. Sweezy had been put on waivers, but he was not scooped up. Bancroft, we talked about him the other day after his 2-goal performance. Intriguing prospect, looking for some seasoning down in the AHL where he could really pop. John Farinacci, a bit of a tweener as well. Lockmelis, one of the better prospects the Bruins have, but still developing. Sweezy will give them some veteran AHL depth. Harrison, Tufte, John Beecher, still pushing for NHL jobs as the roster narrows. The Bruins will finish the preseason Saturday at TD Garden against the Rangers. They open October 8th in Washington. Then they will be home on the 9th to take on the Chicago Blackhawks. So a back-to-back. Harrison looks promising, likely destined for the AHL. The bigger story is Korpisalo looking pretty good. The roster picture sharpening as cuts roll in, but some big decisions yet to be made on those waiver exempt guys like Minton, Patra, Lysell, on guys who would have to go through waivers in order to be sent down, most notably Michael DiPietro, who would have a good chance of being scooped up as teams look to add some goaltending depth. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Boston Bruins. I'm still shaking my head over David Pastrňák not making the top 10 on the Locked On NHL's top 100 list. Just mind-boggling. At any rate, thank you for making Locked On Bruins your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the 2025-26 NHL season preview on Locked On NHL. It's a 6-episode series bringing you the best local insight to make you the most informed NHL fan heading into a new season. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Same as Locked On Boston Bruins. Please do subscribe on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube so that you never miss a thing. Coming up on Monday, we'll break down the preseason finale against the Rangers. Look ahead to final roster decisions before opening night. Don't forget to follow along on X, Instagram, Threads, YouTube, Blue Sky, TikTok. Just search up Locked On Boston Bruins. You can find me at Ian McLaren. Please subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. Please also take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Have a fantastic weekend. I am sorry to you Boston Red Sox fans who suffered a loss last night. I will be rooting against the Yankees quite ferociously this weekend as they're coming up here to Ontario to take on the Blue Jays. This has been a fresh episode of Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day.